I'm not the janitor. I'm your boss. The words hit the room like a thunderclap, echoing off the cold glass walls and silencing every voice. For 15 years, they had called me invisible, passed me by without a second glance, dismissed me as just the cleaning lady. But today, I was standing tall, not as Evelyn Carter the janitor, but as Evelyn Carter the majority shareholder, the rightful owner of Carter Freight Lines. And they weren't prepared for it. Every morning before dawn, when the city of Atlanta was still wrapped in quiet, I was already at work. My uniform was faded blue, my sneakers worn thin from countless miles pacing these hallways. I pushed a squeaky cleaning cart past the heavy wooden doors of the headquarters, the fluorescent lights flickering on as I moved deeper into the belly of the company. The building itself was a monument to success, glass and steel, reaching skyward, reflecting the ambitions of those who called this place home. Marble floors gleamed where executives strode with confidence, clutching tablets and sipping expensive coffee. And yet, behind those gleaming walls and polished shoes, a darker story unfolded, one of silence, neglect, and disregard. I was a part of this story, though they tried to erase me from it. 15 years of wiping fingerprints off elevator buttons no one bothered to clean. 15 years of gathering crumpled napkins from conference tables and gum wrappers from the break room floor. 15 years of listening. Listening to the laughter that excluded me, to the whispered plans that didn't include me, to the arrogance that assumed I was less than human. To the executives, I was background noise, a ghost who swept away their messes without complaint. They didn't know my name. They didn't know the woman behind the mop bucket. They didn't know I was the reason this company existed. Before dawn, when the city was still silent, I passed through those halls and offices, places where decisions were made without me, where futures were shaped without my voice. I moved quietly, unnoticed, gathering fragments of truth from the careless words and hidden files left behind. The marketing director who left his sandwich on the floor without a second thought. The careless spills blamed on me. The senior executives who joked about workers like me as if dignity were something to be laughed at. I heard it all, and I recorded it all. But this wasn't just about cleaning floors. This was about power, the kind that can be invisible, silent, and waiting for the right moment. That moment had finally come. I want you to imagine the scene, the early morning light filtering through the large windows, the hum of computers booting up, the soft shuffle of feet starting their day. I'm there in my faded uniform, moving through this world of privilege and power, a world that thinks it owns me but doesn't even know who I really am. I paused outside the executive offices where gleaming plaques and gold-framed certificates declared success and authority. I wiped the glass, leaving behind the smudges of careless fingers, a quiet reminder that even the most polished surfaces hold imperfections. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a single message. "We're ready when you are." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because the time to act was near. Years ago, before I was ever a janitor here, I sat at a kitchen table in Atlanta with my late husband, James Carter. Together, we dreamed of building a company not just for ourselves, but for every hardworking man and woman who deserved a fair shot. James was the heart and drive, a man who'd worked delivery routes through Georgia and beyond, knowing every mile by memory. I was the mind, the quiet strategist, the one who crunched the numbers, filed the paperwork, and kept us afloat in the early days. In 1998, with nothing but hope and determination, we started Carter Freight Lines with a single rented office and 2 clunky flip phones. I invested my inheritance, quietly registering papers in my name, protecting our dream even when the world told us to give up. But life isn't fair. James died too soon in a late-night accident on I-85. The grief was unbearable, but the betrayal that followed was even worse. Stephen McAllister, James's partner, moved quickly to push me out. The new CEO, Richard Holden, a man with no connection to our struggle but plenty of ambition, stepped in, reshaping the company into something cold and ruthless. For years, I stayed silent, watching my husband's dream twisted into a machine that cared more about bonuses than people. But I wasn't gone. I was watching. Waiting. I listened to every conversation, recorded every injustice. I saw workers denied overtime, watched safety ignored, and witnessed a culture of fear and silence. I was invisible to them, but invisible doesn't mean powerless. So here I stand, no longer a ghost, but a force they cannot ignore. What would you do if the person you underestimated was the one holding all the cards? Would you believe the quiet woman in the faded uniform or dismiss her until it's too late? I want you to think about that because this story is only just beginning and the real fight is yet to come. The mornings at Carter Freight Lines had a rhythm that few noticed. The clatter of rolling carts, the low murmur of voices behind closed doors, the faint hum of machines starting up all the sounds of a company alive and breathing. But for 15 years, I wasn't part of that life. I was the shadow moving quietly beneath it all. I walked the same floors every day in my faded blue uniform and worn sneakers, pushing a cart with cleaning supplies, wiping down surfaces they pretended didn't need cleaning. To them, I was just a janitor, a ghost. Nobody acknowledged except when something spilled or broke. But to me, every inch of this building held a story. Every stain on the carpet, every smudge on the glass was a footprint of their arrogance and disregard. I remember the marketing director who tossed his half-eaten sandwich on the hallway floor instead of the trash bin. I picked it up without a word, as I always did. When he later spilled coffee on the same spot and blamed me for not cleaning it well enough, I just nodded quietly. It was a small battle, but it told me everything I needed to know about how little they saw me, how little they saw anyone like me. And then there was Richard Holden, the CEO, who wore his disdain like a cologne. I heard him once boasting in the executive lounge, "How do you expect someone who's never had a desk to ever understand what running a business really means?" His laughter echoed in the halls, cold and dismissive. They never saw the woman behind the mop bucket who'd helped build this company from the ground up. They didn't know my name. They never asked. To them, I was the cleaning lady. But I was watching. I was listening. Every whispered insult, every secret meeting where they decided to cut health benefits or deny overtime, I was there. I wrote it all down in a small black notebook hidden in my locker, dates, names, places, words that others thought were safe from the world. I saw the drivers coming in with tired backs and tired eyes carrying stacks of overtime slips that would never be approved. I heard the HR ladies whisper about how to manage the staff without raising costs. I saw mid-level managers get escorted out for daring to speak up about wage disparities or unsafe conditions. And every day the divide between the polished executives and the workers grew wider, not just in money, but in respect and dignity. This was more than just a business. It was a mirror of a world that had long decided some people deserved less because of the color of their skin and the clothes they wore to work. Sometimes it felt like I was fighting a storm with a broom, but every sweep of the mop was a quiet defiance, every wipe of the glass a reminder that I was still here, still watching. You might wonder why I never spoke up sooner, why I didn't confront them head on. The truth is, this was never a game of loud voices or quick wins. It was about patience and timing. It was about gathering every piece of truth until their walls of lies could no longer hold. For years, I carried the weight of being invisible, but also the power of knowing. And sometimes, knowing is the most dangerous weapon of all. What would you do if you held the truth that could bring down the powerful but no one believed you because of the uniform you wore? Would you stay silent, or would you wait for the perfect moment to strike? I want you to think about the people in your life, the ones who work behind the scenes, the ones society often forgets. What stories are they holding? What battles are they fighting quietly while the world looks the other way? Because when the time comes, the truth doesn't whisper, it shouts. And I'm getting ready to shout louder than anyone ever expected. But before that moment arrives, there are shadows to navigate, betrayals to uncover, and a system built on lies to dismantle piece by piece. Stay with me, because the battle for Carter Freight Lines is about more than just a company. It's about justice for every unseen hand that keeps America moving and the reckoning that must follow. They say that patience is a virtue. But sometimes it feels more like a burden carrying the weight of secrets no one believes, watching injustice play out day after day, and knowing the truth won't set you free until the time is right. For me, those 15 years weren't just years of cleaning floors. They were years of silent witnessing a slow-burning fire fueled by every unfair paycheck, every denied request for sick leave, every whispered insult that cut deeper than any blade. When my husband James passed away in that tragic accident, it wasn't just a personal loss. It was the moment everything began to unravel. The man I trusted, Stephen McAllister, my late husband's business partner, was quick to erase James's name from the company books, and when the new CEO, Richard Holden, arrived with his polished smile and colder heart, the writing was on the wall. They didn't just push me aside. They pushed aside every memory, every hard-fought sacrifice my family had made to build Carter Freight Lines. But what they failed to see was that I had the contract signed, documents, ownership papers, legal proof that I was as much a part of this company as they were. I could have stormed into the boardroom with lawyers demanding control and justice right then and there, but I didn't. Because sometimes the strongest weapon isn't confrontation, it's strategy. It's waiting. Watching, gathering the facts until the house of cards can no longer stand. So I went back. Not as Evelyn Carter, the rightful owner, not as the widow of the company's founder. I came back as a janitor. It was a disguise, yes, but also a shield. No one recognized me. No one thought to look twice at the woman pushing a squeaky cart down the hallways. I was invisible, a ghost among the people I once led, and that invisibility became my advantage. Every day I took notes, every conversation, every expense report, every unfair dismissal and bonus cut, all recorded in my little black notebook. I saw the cruelty hidden behind closed doors, drivers denied overtime, warehouse workers struggling under impossible demands, and janitors like Linda Johnson crying in the locker room because the company refused to grant her a day off to care for her injured son. I watched as Richard Holden pocketed bonuses worth thousands while the people who kept the company running barely made ends meet. And I heard the laughter, the cruel jokes at our expense, the callous remarks about how these people should just be grateful to have a job. I won't lie, there were days I wanted to scream, to storm out and tell them all what I thought of their greed and prejudice. But I didn't, because I knew the truth would be my voice when my mouth could not be heard. You might be wondering why stay silent for so long. Why not fight back immediately? It's a question I've been asked more times than I can count. Some wonder if it was fear. Others doubt my resolve. But the truth is, power isn't just about what you say. It's about when you say it. If I had acted too soon, they would have painted me as angry or unstable. They would have used every trick in their book to discredit me, to erase my voice. So I waited. I let them show their true colors, and they did day after day, year after year. Now, armed with years of proof and a heart burning for justice, I'm ready. But before I make my move, I want to ask you, have you ever felt invisible, like no matter how hard you worked or how much you cared, the world just refused to see you? Have you ever held a secret truth, a hidden strength waiting for the right moment to reveal it? If so, you're not alone. Because sometimes the quietest among us carry the heaviest burdens and the greatest power. The next chapter isn't just about reclaiming a company. It's about reclaiming dignity. It's about proving that justice delayed is not justice denied. It's about showing that no amount of wealth or prejudice can silence the truth forever. And I promise you, when I step forward, it won't just shake Carter Freight Lines. It will shake every glass ceiling and every wall built to keep people like me in the shadows. So stay with me, because what happens next isn't just my story, it's ours. And the reckoning is coming. The hardest battles are often fought in silence. I moved through the halls of Carter Freight Lines not as a conqueror, but as a quiet observer, a shadow gathering strength behind the scenes. The people I passed, the conversations I overheard, all were pieces of a puzzle that had long been shattered but was now slowly being put back together. You might think it's easy to stand up to power when you know the truth, but power has many faces. Some shout from the rooftops, others whisper behind closed doors. Some wield money and influence like weapons, and some, like Richard Holden, use fear and disdain to keep people in line. I watched Richard strut through the building with the arrogance of a man who thought the world owed him everything. I heard his cold jokes about those people who should be grateful just to have a job. I felt the weight of his indifference every time a driver's overtime slip was denied, or when an employee's health benefits were quietly slashed without warning. It was more than greed. It was a deep, systemic belief that some people were simply less deserving because of the color of their skin, the titles they held, or the clothes they wore to work. And that belief poisoned everything. But beneath the surface, a storm was growing. I wasn't alone. Linda Johnson, a fellow janitor whose teenage son had been in a serious accident, confided in me about her struggles to get time off. Struggles that ended in tears and silence. The drivers whispered about their unpaid overtime. The warehouse workers shared stories of back injuries ignored and safety violations swept under the rug. Together, these stories formed a chorus of frustration and betrayal. Yet the company's polished exterior remained untouched. The boardroom, with its gleaming walnut table and sparkling chandeliers, was a world apart from the break rooms and loading docks where the real work happened. I documented everything. Every unfair dismissal, every falsified report, every bribe, every lie. My little black notebook grew thick with evidence, but more importantly, it grew heavy with the weight of truth. I met with Harold Simmons, my attorney, and the one person who believed not just in the facts, but in the fight for justice. Together, we pieced together a plan, knowing full well that the coming storm would shake this company to its core. But storms don't announce themselves in thunderclaps. They start as whispers, subtle, unseen, yet unstoppable. And sometimes even the most silent storm can bring the fiercest winds. I want to ask you, have you ever been caught in a storm you didn't expect? A moment when everything you believed in was challenged by forces beyond your control. Have you ever felt so powerless that silence seemed the only option until it wasn't? I'm asking because this story is as much about that quiet strength as it is about a company or a fight for control. It's about the people who live in the shadows but carry the weight of the world. And soon, those shadows will no longer be ignored. As the weeks passed, tension in the building became palpable. Richard Holden grew more reckless, cutting corners to boost profits while ignoring cries for fairness. His arrogance was his undoing. One afternoon, after a meeting where he bragged about his latest bonuses, he dismissed concerns about safety violations as the whining of lazy workers. The room filled with uneasy silence, but behind that, anger simmered. I felt it, and I knew it wasn't just mine. That evening, I gathered more evidence, emails, financial records, voice recordings, each one a nail in the coffin of Richard's empire. But collecting proof was only half the battle. The other half was making sure it counted when the time came. I asked myself every day, when will that time be? When will the world see what I see? The truth is, I didn't know, but I had faith that justice, no matter how delayed, was inevitable. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice, one moment to turn the tide. And I was ready to be that voice. What about you? Have you ever held back your truth waiting for the right moment to speak? Have you ever wondered if silence is your shield or your prison? Share your thoughts with me, because this isn't just my story. It's a story about all of us who've faced walls built by others' prejudice and greed. The storm is coming, and soon it will break. The moment I'd been waiting for was close, so close I could almost taste it. For years, I had gathered every scrap of truth, every whispered secret, every unjust decision made behind closed doors. But collecting evidence wasn't enough. I had to make sure it mattered. I had to make sure it hit them where it hurt their pride, their power, their carefully constructed illusions. That Tuesday afternoon, the building was quieter than usual. The hum of voices was replaced by an uneasy tension, the kind that creeps up when something unseen is about to break loose. I had just finished cleaning the third-floor break room, wiped down the counters, emptied the trash, and restocked the stale coffee packets they called premium. But then I saw it. A half-eaten slice of birthday cake chocolate smeared carelessly on the expensive carpet right in the middle of the hallway. A plastic fork stuck in it like a cruel joke. No one would have noticed it or cared except me. I bent down slowly, picking it up not because it was difficult, but because that cake was a symbol. A careless mess left in plain sight. A challenge. And then I heard his voice. "Miss Carter." Richard Holden's voice echoed from the end of the hall, his hands shoved in his pockets, a smirk playing on his lips. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to the floor next to where the cake had been. I stood up straight, holding the empty plate and my mop handle. "There's no spot," I said quietly, letting the silence fill the space between us. He chuckled, clearly enjoying himself. "Come on now, Evelyn. You people just pretend to clean so you can stay on the clock. Maybe if I paid you more, you'd find the spots before I do." His words cut deep a reminder of everything I and so many others had endured. But I didn't flinch. What people is that I asked, my voice calm but steady. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "I'm just saying, do your job." I nodded once. "I'll make sure it's spotless." He clapped his hands and walked away, proud of his little victory, unaware of the storm brewing beneath his feet. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I slipped into the records room, a place only a few knew I had access to, thanks to a badge I'd borrowed months before. I worked quietly, pulling files, taking photos, printing reports. There was the bonus report showing how Richard Holden had awarded himself $55,000 for operational excellence, the same quarter they slashed meal stipends and froze wages for janitors and drivers. There were emails about ignoring safety violations, a driver slipping and hurting his back, but no paperwork filed, no investigation, no accountability. I felt the rage boil inside me, but I controlled it, because rage alone isn't enough. Then came the final straw. The next morning, Cynthia Johnson, a fellow janitor and dear friend, came into the locker room with tears in her eyes. Her teenage son had been seriously injured in a car accident, and she'd asked for just one day off to be with him at the hospital. Denied. Not enough coverage, they said. I sat there watching her struggle to speak through her tears, feeling the unfairness squeeze my heart. That was it. I pulled out my phone and called Harold Simmons. "It's time," I said. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I've been cleaning up messes my whole life," I replied. "Let's go." Over the next 48 hours, everything moved faster than I expected. I handed Harold the final stack of evidence, the notebooks, the photos, the emails, the reports. Everything that proved the corruption, the greed, the cruelty. We scheduled a closed-door shareholder meeting, one they thought would be routine, boring, and safe. But it wouldn't be. I walked into that building the next day wearing a different uniform, a navy blazer, crisp blouse, and shoes that hadn't touched a mop in years. I passed the front desk without a glance at my old cart. I took the elevator straight to the 8th floor, the boardroom. Inside waited 12 leather chairs, a giant chandelier, and the same $14,000 walnut table Richard loved to brag about. At 10:00 a.m., the quarterly review began. Richard stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his tie loose, smirking like he owned the room, like he owned the whole company. Meredith Blake. His second-in-command sat beside him. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. Curtis McAllister, the old partner who had helped push James out years ago, looked uneasy but said nothing. 5 minutes late, I entered, no mop, no gloves. Just a folder, heavy with the truth. Richard frowned. "This is a meeting. Maintenance comes after hours." I didn't blink. "I'm not here for maintenance." The room shifted, the air thick with disbelief. "Do you have an appointment?" Meredith asked, voice cold. "I do," I said, stepping forward, "and I believe the shareholders were properly notified." Harold entered behind me, briefcase in hand, calm and commanding. "Good morning. I'm Harold Simmons, legal counsel for Mrs. Evelyn Carter, majority shareholder of Carter Freight Lines." Silence. Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. I laid the folder on the table and flipped it open. Signed partnership agreements from 1998, updated ownership documents, and a notarized letter granting me full voting rights after my husband's death. Curtis shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "That can't be right." I looked at him coldly. "You remember writing those contracts, Curtis?" He had no reply. I turned to the room, voice low but firm. "For 15 years, I watched this company turn into a machine of greed and neglect. I watched bonuses padded while basic human dignity was stripped from the workers. I watched safety violations ignored and employees silenced. And I watched you turn my husband's dream into your playground." Richard laughed nervously. "This must be some mistake." Harold interrupted sharply. "All documents have been verified. Mrs. Carter has called for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO effective immediately." Richard stood slamming his hands on the table. "You don't know what you're doing." I walked slowly around the table, meeting their eyes. "You ignored us for too long. You failed. I am the company now." Security entered silently moments later. Richard's protests died as he realized the tide had turned. The game was over. The boardroom was silent. The weight of truth hung heavy in the air, but the real challenge was just beginning. Taking control of Carter Freight Lines wasn't a victory parade, it was a call to arms. For 15 years, injustice had seeped into every corner of this company. It wasn't just the cut wages, the denied overtime, or the broken promises. It was the quiet erosion of dignity, the systemic disregard for the people who kept this machine running, most of them my own people, the backbone of the company. I looked around that room, now filled with the same faces who'd ignored me for years, and I knew words alone wouldn't fix this. I wasn't there to play CEO. I was there to listen. Really, listen to the voices that had been drowned out by boardroom arrogance and cold calculations. The next morning, I parked in the executive lot for the first time. It felt strange, unfamiliar. Not because of the space, it was better closer covered from the rain, but because it symbolized a world I'd been kept from. I walked inside with my head held high, greeted the front desk receptionist by name. "Good morning, Tasha." She blinked. "Mrs. Carter." "Just Evelyn." I smiled. In the elevator, I held my breath, knowing the eyes watching me were filled with disbelief, skepticism, maybe even resentment. But I pushed those thoughts away. By 9:30 a.m., I was in my office, fresh paint on the walls, same view Richard loved to brag about, but a place I was finally allowed to call mine. The first order of business, a meeting. Not with the board, not with the executives. With the people who mattered most, and the drivers, the warehouse staff, the janitors, the customer service reps. The room filled quickly. Faces I'd seen in hallways, people who'd been overlooked or forgotten, some suspicious, others hopeful. I stood at the front, no microphone, just my voice. "I want to start by saying thank you," I began. "Most of you never knew who I was, and you didn't need to, because your work spoke louder than any title in this building." I paused, letting that sink in. I'm here to change things. But not by myself. I told them about what I'd seen, about the injustices, the broken promises. But I also told them about my vision, a company where respect isn't tied to a title, where everyone's voice matters, and where dignity is the foundation. A driver named Alonzo raised his hand. "Does this mean we get overtime back?" "Yes," I said. "And retro pay for the last 2 quarters. You'll see it on Friday's check." A woman from HR, Deborah, stood. "What about health coverage? It's been getting worse every year." "We're reviewing new providers," I said. "And every employee will get a survey to weigh in. No more backroom decisions about your well-being." There were no applause breaks, no loud cheers, just a quiet murmur as people turned to each other slowly, realizing I was serious. Someone from the back called out, "What about the people? Richard fired without cause. We're reviewing those terminations," I answered. "If you were wrongfully dismissed, you'll be contacted. At the very least, we'll clear your names." Another voice, softer this time. "Are you really the owner?" I smiled. I always have been. I ended the meeting with a promise. If you speak, I will listen, and if you work, you will be respected. But the road ahead wasn't smooth. Old power structures didn't disappear overnight. A few executives challenged my decisions. Some questioned my ability to grow the company. One sneered, "You think you can run this business without a background in corporate management?" I looked him in the eye and said, "I scaled my grief into silence for 15 years. I think I can manage your spreadsheets." That shut him up. I brought in new department heads, people who had been overlooked for years. Many of them from within the ranks. People who understood what respect and fairness meant because they'd lived without it. I renegotiated vendor contracts, renewed warehouse leases, and brought back traditions that had fallen out of favor, like the annual Employee Appreciation Day. I visited every department, sat with them in break rooms, ate their lunches, listened to their stories. Slowly, the building began to feel different, not softer but realer. One night, I found a note slipped under my office door. "I didn't think anyone like us could ever make it to a place like this," it read. "You proved me wrong. I keep that note in my top drawer." But even with these changes, a question kept coming back. Why did I wait so long? I've heard it from many, some curious, some doubtful, some quietly resentful. Why not act sooner? I don't get defensive anymore. I sit back, lace my fingers, and say the same thing every time. Power only matters when you know how to use it. I waited because the company needed to show who they truly were without me watching. I needed to see the rot rise to the surface. Because if I had stepped in too early, they'd say I was overreacting. They'd gaslight me, twist the story, call it noise over nothing. But 15 years of silence that made me undeniable. I saw everything, and when the time came, I didn't argue. I showed them the truth, and they folded under the weight of their own choices. What do you think about Evelyn's journey so far? Would you have had the strength to wait and watch for years? Or would you have fought louder and sooner? I invite you to share your thoughts and stories in the comments because this story is about more than one woman or one company. It's about every voice that's been silenced and every fight still waiting to be won. The next chapter is about hope and how change begins when we dare to see the invisible. The courtyard was alive with a new kind of energy, that morning laughter and chatter replacing the usual quiet resignation. It was the first company gathering in years that didn't feel like a hollow obligation, but a celebration of survival and hope. I stood by the food trucks and folding chairs, watching faces light up in a way I hadn't seen before. Alonzo, one of the drivers whose overtime had been denied for so long, raised his soda can to mine. To the quiet ones, he said, his voice rough but proud. I smiled, clinking my can against his. To the ones they never saw coming. This moment was more than a party. It was a testament to what happens when the invisible decide they will no longer be ignored. But the truth is, this victory didn't come easy. Behind every change was a battle against skepticism, old habits, and the bitter remnants of those who refused to believe that a woman like me could lead. Every new policy, every fair paycheck, every respectful conversation was hard-won. I remember the voices that questioned me, whispered doubts in halls, and sometimes openly challenged my authority. "You don't belong here," one executive sneered. But belonging isn't about titles or suits. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's lonely. I also remember the faces of those who had been broken by the system, the workers who had given their all and been cast aside. Their stories fueled my resolve, and slowly we rebuilt not just a company, but a community. The changes were more than financial. We restored dignity. We listened. We made space for voices that had long been silenced. Because respect isn't a privilege, it's a right. Now, when I walk these halls, I'm greeted not with avoidance, but with recognition. "Good morning, Evelyn," the receptionist says with a smile. "Just Evelyn," I reply. I've learned that power doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from persistence, from courage, and from the willingness to wait for the right moment to act. And most of all, power comes from knowing who you are even when no one else does. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's this. Don't let anyone tell you that you're invisible. Don't let anyone decide your worth. Because sometimes the person sweeping the floors is the one who built the house. And sometimes the quietest voice can start the loudest revolution. So, to everyone watching, especially those who have felt unseen or unheard, your story matters. Your strength matters. And your time will come. Thank you for standing with me. Thank you for believing in change, because together we're unstoppable. What did this story stir in you? Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever been underestimated and yet found the strength to rise? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, your hopes. Share them in the comments below. And remember, no matter how dark the days, no matter how heavy the silence, your voice has power. Your story is waiting to be told, and the world is ready to listen.